Уважаемые дамы и господа, просьба занять ваши места. Мы начинаем работу сессии 3. Dear ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to your seats. We're about to start session 3. На сцену приглашаются модератор Сергей Рябков, заместитель министра иностранных дел Российской Федерации, Zhang Yuyan, директор Института мировой экономики и политики Китайской академии общественных наук, Роберт Легвольд, почетный профессор факультета политических наук Колумбийского университета США, Ли Юнцюань, директор Института социального развития Европы и Азии при исследовательском центре развития Государственного совета КНР, глава Китайской ассоциации российских, восточноевропейских и центральноазиатских исследований, Томас Грэм, ведущий научный сотрудник Совета по международным делам США, Сергей Кислицын, исполняющий обязанности директора Института США и Канады РАН, Александр Ломанов, заместитель директора по научной работе ММО РАН. Dear ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage. Moderator Sergey Ryabkov, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Zhang Yuyan, Director of the Institute of World Economics and Politics, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, China. Robert Legwold, Professor Emeritus of the Department of Political Science, Columbia University, USA. Li Yunchuan, Chairman of the All China Association for the Study of Russia, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Director of the Institute of Social Development of Europe and Asia of the Development Research Center of the State Council of the People's Republic China. Thomas Graham, Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations USA. Sergey Kислицын, Acting Director of the Institute for the United States and Canadian Studies, Russian Academy of Sciences. Alexander Lomanov, Deputy Director for Scientific Work of Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations.
Добрый вечер, уважаемые.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear guests. I'm very happy to be here on the stage again, especially in the situation when I was kindly suggested by the organizers to moderate this session. One of the most interesting, I'm sure, and very informative sessions about the key, I guess, key question of international relations and the modern geopolitics. The session about the relations of the U.S. and China. The organizers absolutely logically and reasonably headed this session, well, gave as competition, interdependence, and global context. And I'm sure that the panelists today As you see the whole panel here, and they represent the leading think tanks, and they will be offline here as well. Well, as we have online Mr. Zhang Yuyan and Mr. Thomas Graham, who will join us online. Mr. Graham will finish his current program, but he will certainly join us. And I will do my best to make this session focus. I really appeal and prevail that you mind the timing and follow the topic of the session. And remember about the content of the abstract of this session. So it is my pleasure to pass the floor now to Mr. Zhang Yuyan, who has been working as director of the Institute of World Economics and Politics of Chinese Academy of Sciences, academician, doctor of sciences, social sciences, a member of National Conference, author of multiple research expert, prominent expert with global name. So the floor is yours.
Moderator. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to the organizer of this international forum. My institute, the Institute of World Economics and Politics, is to some extent is a copy of our counterpart in Russia, IWEP. My institute was created in 1978. Prior to that, there were two independent research institutes. One is the Institute of World Economics, the other is the World Politics. We combined that two research institutes as one, the IWEP, based on the belief that without fully understanding of world politics, no one could fully understand the world economics and vice versa. So we let the two research institutes merged as one. No, as far as the topics we are going to talk about is concerned, I think every panel of this received four questions from the organizer. It's very difficult for me to address or talk about all those four issues. So I'd like to concentrate myself on the question that is the world is heading toward a new bipolarity. What will happen to the world economy and how inevitable is the prospect of parallel production systems, standards, and markets. There are two keywords. One is parallel system. If my memory is correct, former Secretary of State of the United States, Dr. Kissinger, several years ago, discussed the so-called parallel system in the BRICS. Four, and also South Africa came in, and now we have 11 members of the BRICS. When the BRICS emerged as a group of emerging economies, Kissinger started to talk about the so-called parallel systems, which means there was a competitor or rivalry towards or to the industrialized countries. Bipolarity is another key word. It's true that during the past several decades, China has, very successfully developed its economy. In economic size, China has already, become a economic power. When we look at the economic size, we can see China's GDP not only in PPP, but also in market exchange rate. China is catching up rapidly. In this sense, China is an economic power, and that's why people around the world are, talking about the so-called, rivalry, so-called bipolarity, and also the G2, and so on and so forth. But I think the catching up of China towards the United States does not necessarily mean the China-U.S. will, will compete fiercely or even confronted with one another. Now, people not only international but also domestically in China, more and more people talking about the competition, the confrontation, potential confrontation between the two countries. I think the majority of Chinese scholars think that the phenomenon, the competition or confrontation, as well as the interdependence, come from the change of perceptions from the U.S. side, as well as the policy change. U.S. scholars, as well as some analysts and the politicians, in their mind, China, along with China's rise, China will definitely challenge the U.S. hegemony, U.S. dominance, and China is going to reshape the world order. With this kind of thinking, eventually and gradually and eventually, economic logic has been, replaced by political logic. It means the division of labor, international division of labor, and allocation of the resources is no longer based on the cost-benefit analysis, but on the self-suffering, so long as the rivalry, so long as the enemy suffers more. So one of the consequences is that the gain from trade becomes less and less. Then the world economy will perform poorly. Now we have already, seen the U.S. policy toward China. For example, people are, discussing the contents of the policy towards China entitled "de-risk." But in some eyes of Chinese scholars, de-risking can be perceived as a disguised decoupling. Well, it's a debating point in today's China, and also when we talk about these issues, China-U.S. relations with our U.S. visitors, we discuss the difference between de-risking and decouple. Some U.S. visitors raise their question like this: do you, are you satisfied with the term de-risking? We will no longer, use the term decouple. It's quite interesting, this kind of policy, in practice, have many, many forms. The United States and his allies and the couples are, establish the so-called small yard and high fences or high walls. They carrying on the policies of friend shoring or near shoring. As a result, China's trade with the United States and with the European Union, not only trade but also investment, are declining in past 2 years. And we have also seen the supply chain is being redesigned and structured. Against this background, more and more Chinese scholars came to a conclusion that the United States is trying its best to weaken China. What I want to stress is that this kind of phenomenon is not what China wants to see. China benefits a lot, huge, from the economic globalization. So that's why China is trying its best to build up an open world economy. It's not only in the interest of China, but also in the interest of the whole world. What China hopes to do is to open ourselves to show that the prospect of a parallel production system or standards or markets will not be inevitable. That's our China's policy response to the so-called bipolarity or parallel production system. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, профессор.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. I think that other participants of today's discussion will touch upon the topic that you raised, that you decided to make it a pivotal part of your presentation. I will rephrase it a little bit differently. So it's an inevitability of competition or interdependence as a domineering factor? Is it possible to decouple? Is it possible to decouple? To what extent the common challenges and trends are common for Beijing and Washington? Because Beijing and Washington, they are moving parallelly, but there are many challenges and situations, including from the viewpoint of establishing multipolarity that you have touched upon in your presentation. I'd like to address the audience with an appeal to comment, to ask questions, accumulate them, write them down, and then addressing the panelists at the end of our session when everyone will have spoken, and then we'll take your questions. Thank you, Professor Zhang. And I am honored to present our next speaker, who on the line will address us. There's a famous, distinguished Robert Legwitz, who's Professor Emeritus of the Department of Political Science, Columbia University, has been involved in the Atlantic issues, and still he is partial to our panel because Professor Legwitz has always concentrated on international relations. That's a very important topic in his line, and over to you, please.
Thank you, Sergey Alexeyevich. It's a pleasure to be back at Primakov Readings Conference. My one regret is that I can't be there as I have been in the past in person, and I hope that at some point when the current tragedy in the war in Ukraine passes, we'll all be together again, Tom Graham, myself, and other participants at Primakov Readings. I think few deny that the U.S. China relations have seriously deteriorated, and that a deepening strategic rivalry is underway. The debate is over how far the process could go. On the one side, I think most observers in my country, including the Biden administration, as well as I believe observers in China and in Russia, believe that the two countries are too entwined, particularly at the economic level, for the relationship to slip into a deep Cold War. When U.S. officials stress that the United States and China are competitors rather than zero-sum rivals, most of these observers nod in agreement. A U.S.-China Cold War, they say, as I often hear, is not in the interest of either country. How could it be when, as U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo reminded us, we have a $700 billion trading relationship with China? The vast majority, 99% of that, has nothing to do with export controls. Xi Jinping reinforced the feeling when last month he told a visiting U.S. congressional delegation that there were, in his words, 1,000 reasons to make U.S.-China relations better and no reason to make them worse. I'm in a group who disagree. Yes, it's obvious that a genuine U.S.-China Cold War is not in the interest of either country. That doesn't mean it can't happen. In fact, I believe the two countries are already farther along the path toward one than people in all three of our countries recognize. I'm not arguing that such a Cold War is inevitable. It can be averted, but averting it requires much greater effort in Washington and Beijing than they are currently making. Let me in telegraphic form describe the elements of a potential U.S. Cold War that are already in place. The primary purpose of my remarks, however, is to focus on what a U.S.-China Cold War would mean not only for the United States and China, but for all, including Russia, and therefore what the stakes are in avoiding it. The ingredients for a U.S.-China Cold War are evident. They're evident in the increased centrality of the military dimension, including its nuclear sphere. The U.S. now characterizes China, particularly our Department of Defense, as the pacing threat. They are evident in the politicization of economic relations and the transformation of economic interdependence into a security concern, in turning technological competition into one of deep strategic rivalry and energizing techno-nationalism in both countries, in stimulating competition for control of international institutions, or alternatively in the creation of alternative competing institutions. And all of this is underpinned by starkly discordant juxtaposition assumptions about the causes and the stakes in the intensifying rivalry. In the first four of these trends, if they are not consciously contained, their current momentum, propelled by the current zero-sum approach in both leaderships, will carry the two countries rapidly toward a Cold War vastly more destructive than today's U.S.-Russia Cold War. The U.S.-Russia Cold War, underway since the eruption of the Ukrainian crisis in 2014, has not engulfed or encompassed, let alone transformed, the international political system. A number of countries have not been part of it, most particularly China. A U.S. China Cold War will. It will, as during the original Cold War, engulf and reshape the entire international system, its institutions, its alliance structures, its economic flows, and its zones of conflict. Intense economic warfare between the two countries that account for 40% of global GDP will deeply warp and destabilize the international economy. Second, key international governmental organizations such as the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and mechanisms such as the G20 will shatter into a patchwork of institutional battlefronts. The nascent but contentious effort to design a regime governing the flow and storage of data will likely entrench two competing models. The expansive but rugged institutional framework that comprises today's global governance structure will fracture into something resembling that during the original Cold War. Only this time, it will be a more balanced standoff. Third, the global commons, its natural resources, communication links, and shared knowledge base will increasingly be an arena of competition rather than cooperation. The sharp descent into a deep U.S.-Russia Cold War illustrates how rapidly and thoroughly all forms of educational, scientific, and technical cooperation can be scuttled. Obstacles to addressing existential threats, such as those posed by climate change and nuclear weapons, will become nearly insurmountable. Fourth, bilateral competition between the United States and China, as in the original Cold War, will inflame and make much less manageable regional conflicts in strategically significant parts of the world. Finally, a U.S. China Cold War will join the U.S. Russia Cold War and push the international system into a new bipolarity. Leaders in Washington, in Beijing, and Moscow, I would think, would want to consider whether this is the world they want to live in. And if not, then now, not when it's too late, they should alter the course they are on. The primary initiative will have to come from Washington and Beijing, but Moscow has a role to play as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Lagvold. So we've listened to your presentation, your assessment, and your proposals very carefully, your recommendations as well. And I think that a lot of what you have said, what you verbalized, it's in the air. It's in the air, and during today's panel, so we'll touch upon these issues again and again. Specifically, such topics, whether there is a risk and if it's there, maybe it's growing, of the transformation of this famous economic interdependence of China and the United States, and morphing it into something that might be dangerous and for the security of both countries. And how can we address this challenge? So you spoke about technological nationalism, transformation of international institutions. You spoke about that, creating competitive institutions, including applying to Bretton Woods instruments. You spoke about that, positioning the United States and Europe as a domineering force in the world. And then I pointed out your bullet point to the fact that while it's not too late, the ruling elites of the relevant countries need to start thinking about change of course. And my question for the discussion part of the panel, that I need to give it to you right now. So who and in which direction this course should be changed? I leave this question with you for the end of the panel. Now I'd like to give the mic to the director of the Institute of Social Development of Europe and Asia, of the Research Center of Development of State Council of China, Mr. Yuyan. You know him very well, many of you. Over to you. Thank you very much. Good evening, dear friends. This is the first time in the. I'm happy that I'm back here, and so I see. So then, China-American relations has become the subject of this session. It's very interesting. So we used to say that the Chinese-U.S. Relations are improving or worsening, but this definition doesn't work anymore. So maybe we do have relations, but we don't know whether they're worsening or improving. It's very difficult to say. So to establish good relations between China and the U.S. And so how come that they evolved to this status? Not because that China is involved in anti-American policy. It's not the reason why the relations have worsened so much. Just the other round. So China has always tried and is trying right now to establish good relations with the United States. But the thing is that both sides, and that's the main reason, they understand differently this new normal. And so this is the key issue, the key problem between China and the United States. And it means that the United States cannot respect the key main interests of China. They fail to do that. In order just to, so there was a meeting to stop this from developing. So there was a meeting between China, Xi Jinping, with the President of the United States, Biden. And that was the idea. And the result of this meeting, so then the Russian side commented upon this meeting. So the main result is partial restoration of the contacts between military institutions of both countries. That's the first result in view of the Russians, and then so differences should not evolve into a conflict about establishing control after control over fentanyl, right? That's the word. So I think that it's not fentanyl is not our problem, because China has established this strictest punishment for fentanyl. China has done that. For the regulation of our relations, we have been talking about three documents: 1972, first document 1978 and 1952. So then 3 communiques have been adopted. They identified the principles of the regulation between United States and Russia, between the United States and China, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and then weapons sales regulation. So these principles have always been violated, these 3 principles. And this is one of the big issues. Moreover, so there are some points. So China, in its relations with China, with the United States, thinks itself humiliated. China feels that. So, for example, blocking the embassy in Yugoslavia. So then this incident with the Chinese aircraft in South China Sea, and there've been some other events in 1993. So when a freighter, Chinese freight vessel, so that it was going to Iran, and the Americans are saying that. So that there are some chemical weapons there on board, and they wanted just to examine it. When we said no, they turned off GPS. They turned off GPS, and our vessel was making circles and could not find its way out. And so I'm sure that starting from that point, so the project of Chinese so new systems started to develop. Because the Chinese demands are very simple. Please respect us. Our demand vis-a-vis the United States and the United States cannot do that. Politics, economy, just we are asking for respect. So the most important problem for the United States is imbalance. Because Chinese American turnover is gaining ground very rapidly, but there is an imbalance between the turnover. And so there was 5 billion at the beginning of the reforms, and 5 billion now 700 billion worth of trade between the United States and China. And so then the main complaint of the United States is imbalance, trade imbalance between China and the U.S. But so if the United States allows for more exports to China of scientific to China. So then this imbalance will be immediately resolved if the United States will agree just to send scientific high-tech things to China. But now they've taken one step further. So they want just to slow down our industry. Trump declared trade war against China. So because with the interesting phrase, so if we stop trading with the Chinese, we'll be able to save $500 billion. That was the statement of Trump. But 3 years later, their trade turnover from 500 went up to 700 after this war. It means that this debuckling, has not happened. So because China and the United States are 2 great economic powers and very powerful. So the volume of our economies accounts for 25% of global GDP. And so the trend and the trade over and the turnover is 20% of global trade. So now in China we have 78,000 American companies, 78 American, and the majority of them. So they are very profitable because their payback is much higher. The profitability margins are much higher than elsewhere in Europe. Of those 78,000 American companies, the main issue, the main problem. The main challenge is that the United States monetized our economic relations. And so they were setting, because they are trying to slow down the economic development of China. That's what they put on stakes on that. Another concern, the United States has already declared that they're going to reformat the regions that surround China. They want to change them. So that's very disturbing because they are neighboring countries. So they're border countries. And that's a great concern for us. And they want to change them. And I think that the main difference between the U.S. and China is that the world should be unipolar or multipolar. So the time of the unipolar world is over. And the multipolar world should be built on the foundation of mutual respect of all countries. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, Director Lee. I agree with you on the point that more often than not, it is so the absence of readiness to take into consideration so the lawful interests of other countries by the United States leads the United States of America to so remembering that the administrations change all the time in the United States. And so this is manifested with different level of intensity, but it's always there, and brings about goes to other international economic incidents. And applying pressure on the governments of other countries, and China is not an exception. And
I share as well your opinion that Washington puts in every effort to reformat for their own interests of geopolitical landscape in many regions, including the region around China, in close proximity to Russia. Yes, the situation is probably the same. Is probably not just with the Chinese cargo vessel brought the leaders in Beijing to the decision to create their own GPS system. They also consider that, and probably in the present situation, we should think that the GLONASS system was very timely. And some other countries also follow this path. And along with other factors, we see this kind of fragmentation to balance this globalization and large and costly projects that in the ideal world could be arranged in a more efficient manner should we have this collaboration and cooperation of technologically developed countries. I thank you for your for sharing, and I would ask Mr. Sergey Kislitsyn, Acting Director of the Institute for the U.S. and Canadian Studies, named after Arbatov, to contribute to our panel. You all know him very well. Sergey Kislitsyn was working in MMO as well in different capacities. Thank you, Sergey Alexeyevich. Yes, indeed, American-Chinese competition will certainly be one of the engines of global transformation, but it will certainly not stop the process of globalization. Indeed, the fragmentation of global economy and international relations like non-tariff trade barriers, export control measures, sanctions, it will all continue and the numbers will grow. But globalization per se is necessary for both the U.S. and China. but it will probably change and look different. Now we are facing a problem of setting up new blocks, but it will not be the blocks of the Cold War period. They will not be likened to the U.S. SSSR confrontation. They will be different by the standards, by terms of participations and access level and some tools. Probably we should not expect that the ideological component of American-Chinese competition will be a significant part, but probably in that format it would be easy for Western countries to operate as we have a saying for general. You can always get we can always get ready for the past war. So the security strategy of Biden administration says that over the next decade will certainly see the fight of dictatorships and democracies and their development models. And whatever model, if we remove all those ideologies, American or Chinese model is more efficient, then this model will really influence the next decade more. The more viable is, the stronger is the model. Development of China and the U.S. Is linked to the international cooperation. The Industrial Revolution 4.0 has factors like expensive equipment, new technologies, and some results and some elements like renewables. So far, the efficiency of those new factors is not obvious, and the state needs to introduce new policies, introduce new projects, cut costs, and cover risks. And it requires global projects. The more scalable the technology, the lower the costs of production. Speaking about China, China has a problem of excessive workforce, excessive production facilities, and so they have to grow their loans to third countries and develop projects like Belt and Way, and develop a large infrastructural project in energy sector, in transport, and which certainly helps Chinese economy grow. And China develops those projects on their own with Chinese capital, engineers, hardware, and products. And what is special, China works both in very good regions of the world, but as well goes to the countries with low level of income and level of life. That's the countries which did not interest the American capital, and now that those countries, poor countries, collaborate with China means for Washington, makes them interesting for Washington. From American point of view, they require attention, considering that China adjusts to the problems and considers problem like default in Sri Lanka in 2022. And the United States also use the global growth to boost their own growth, but they have to do it with the principles and capacities of their own. And nowadays, American projects certainly follow Chinese initiatives and even copy them. We cannot imagine that the United States and the American Congress allow to build some kind of new energy infrastructure in emerging countries. But at least what they can do, that they can the American investors can demonstrate their interest in some low-level income countries. It is important, and it should be arranged in such a way that the new administration in the U.S. would not cancel the achievements of the previous one. Now, Biden administration works actively on creating informal cooperation platforms in Latin America, Asia Pacific, in Africa. These are framework agreements that offer the countries economic institution chains, the logistic chains, supply chains, green energy principles, as well as simplified customs procedures and better working conditions and healthcare and education and so on. Informal institutes that the U.S. offer, and they suggest involving other states. And over the last 2 years, they developed partnership in global investment. That is an American initiative that together with the G7. And this partnership is targeted at high-tech projects in low and mid-income countries, and promotion of American products and products of American partners by creating markets in those countries. This development process is simple through the means that the American governmental organization can provide. Some projects are being launched, like green energy, digital infrastructure. At the starting stage, they embed, they kind of take the nature of Western principles, so that after the starting stage, they would become attractive in terms of investments. And further partnership is supposed to compete with the Chinese Belt and Way Initiative. As Jack Sullivan, Council of the President, says that they intend to create high standards for everyone. In particular, transparency for investors, unlike China, that their projects are very much criticized by the states for their non-transparent nature. So the U.S. intend to create more transparent and clear structure. Speaking at the loans, the ratio is now 1 to 4, and so Chinese initiatives can be carried out quick, but very unclear condition, or American option on standard institutions, project conditions, recipient country, whatever. What does it mean for the global development on the whole? How will it impact the freedom of capital and trade in goods and services? On one hand, standardization is necessary, considering that we are at the stage of Industrial Revolution 4.0. And such standards mean certification, which creates a negative element because getting certification becomes a political thing, just like achievements of the fourth industrial revolution, meaning technologies the consumer doesn't have. So in Russia, after the special military operation, we realized that some goods and services can be withdrawn from the users if they're not politically loyal. So it's kind of a post-Washington consensus where deregulation of economy is being preserved, but they developed new services and goods for the countries who cannot produce them. At the same time, they exchange them for political loyalty for the users of such products. And insufficient investment in global infrastructure is approximately $2.3 annually. By 2040, the total cumulative volume will amount to approximately 79 trillion, with 94 necessary. So the competition of two creates this kind of division And that's what we have in the infrastructural development. There's a great market where probably everyone should get involved, including the BRICS countries. And in this case, by interaction, collaboration, we can fix this situation that now creates risks for us. Thank you so much. I thank you, dear Sergey Vladimirovich. I believe you raised a problem that before your presentation was only mentioned by other panelists. I believe it is one of the key problems, that is competition of the models and the sources of growth, including domestic growth through external resources. And it may become one of the competition points between the U.S. and China, and the confrontation of ideologies and geopolitics on one hand with the laws of the global market. If it remains, but still the laws of efficiency and competitiveness will be monitored. It's like a polygon for testing ground for testing new economic relation. And I believe that both practitioners and scholars need to look at those factors very much. I thank you so much and invite Professor, Acting Deputy Director of IMMO and the Head of Asian and Pacific Studies, Mr. Alexander Lomanov. I suggest that we try to peek into the future in a very specific context, as in the Chinese scientific and political literature, they often say that the next 15 years, 10 to 15 years, will be decisive for China. If they hold on by 2035, all the problems of China will just be solved. Let us look at the main points, what may happen over the next 15 years, and to what extent those optimistic expectations are realistic. So, in fact, China has a weak position now. It is weaker than the U.S. economically. In science and technical development, they don't have military and political alliances, don't have military bases overseas. So now this rivalry or confrontation, all the words that we used for this session are absolutely asymmetrical. And this asymmetry is not in favor of China. So will Cold War, large-scale Cold War, start between the country? It is becoming more and more realistic. The first area that we want to mention is ideology. Chinese experts assure that nothing like that has changed or will change compared to the previous Cold War. China does not try to export revolution. China don't say that they need to overturn the class of bourgeoisie and build the proletarian state. They have been saying they were saying it before the mid-70s. But on the other hand, when we speak about ideological confrontation, we need to read what experts, Western experts write about China. If you look at the publications of the Western mainstream, you will know that Xi Jinping is not a Marxist, just a Marxist, but a Leninist. Nothing like the Soviet time, but still, it's an accusation of China that it is a centralized Leninist state, the basis of which is incompatible with Western democracy. So we keep hearing it more and more. And hence, the most important problem is equality and respect and dialogue about values. Is it all possible? Looks like the chance is getting thinner. In March, Xi Jinping proclaimed the global initiative of civilization, third in the row from global Chinese initiatives, saying that you should not look down at other civilizations. All civilizations are equal. You cannot impose values and other things. Will the West be ready to accept this paradigm and stop, looking down on everyone and stop mentoring everyone? So I guess this is kind of a position of democracy and autocracy is existential for the West. Every time when the Chinese mention the equality of models and civilization, usually the Westerners accuse them of relativism. How come you want to position yourselves as equal to us? The West, the liberal model, is higher, is much above your totalitarianism. Some 10, 15 years ago, the Western mainstream considered it unimportant. They thought that China follows the way of de-ideologization. They go peace and development, who will mind? Over the last 10 years, Chinese ideological stage has changed radically. We cannot compare the present situation to the one 10 years ago. This trend can be called re-ideologization of Chinese policy. It is a powerful trend that is strong, and it will continue until for the next decade. So the first conclusion is that in the ideological era, there may be no truce or peace treaty between China and the U.S. Second question that
Interdependence in economy, that's the second issue. That's then anti-Russian Western sanctions. That's a good example. So we see that the interdependence can become a weapon, but it's a one-time weapon. So you can apply it only once, use it only once, working on the assumption that your opponent is weaker and that you can destroy him with one blow. And so certainly in future, the U.S. will try to use this last argument of this kind of, let's put it this way, this powerful blow, non-nuclear blow, that hoping that it will so dent the Chinese economy, destroy its political status, etc. Now we're talking that the consequences of possible sanctions of anti-Russian type, so Taiwan crisis, so then the possibility of applying the same kind of sanctions, and so it will be a horrible destruction of the global economy. So several years ago, when Russia Chinese was only 100 and American Chinese was 600, but now so then the Russian American and Russian Chinese and Chinese American so completely different. So now this is the government of Russia. So the main task is to bring the trade turnover between China and Russia by 300, 300 billion. And now, and probably in the near future, so the trade over between China and the United States of America will go down to 500 billion. So 300 billion versus 550 billion at the end of this. These are the comparable figures already. It's not stark difference, but the basis for creation new constructive ties with other partners. 300 and 500 is close, and with alternative suppliers, alternative trading partners. So we spoke about techno-nationalism. Effectively, when we speak about techno-nationalism, so we need to remember about techno-hegemony, techno-imperialism. You can just think up any word. But when we say that the U.S. and China are two techno powers, it's when an attempt of an advanced power to stop exporting certain components to slow down its development. So that China is making every effort to escape this trap. And I can tell you that in 10 years' time, so when the historians will be writing textbooks about the rule of Xi Jinping, I'm sure that decentralization of power, corruption, so will be already not top on the agenda. Because the most important, what Xi Jinping did, he created news. It's maintaining national security and economic development. Before Xi Jinping, that did not exist. So national security, new economy. So that's why new economy, new technologies is not so much an economic issue, where you can get spend money knowing that it will never be paid back, but maintaining national security. What will we see in 10 years? At the beginning of the 30s, Chinese experts are saying that by that time Americans will have understood that they failed to stifle China and will remove all constraints, and they will start to sell high-tech things to China. But the question is whether China will be buying them, because China now is investing a lot in development of new high-tech technologies, cutting-edge technologies. What would be the point in 10, 15 years' time just to buy obsolete things? So when China in 15 years will be producing them, they will be producing them by themselves. So that's why this debuckling. So then military potentials will play a very important role, because the more powerful militarily China will be, so then the more nervous the U.S. will become. And then the more talk will be about the necessity to control the weapons, and that needs to be done vis-a-vis China, and that will not be possible to do because China will refuse to curtail its. So then, summing up my presentation, I can say that in 10, 15 years' time, the relations between China and U.S. will not be better. They will be more structured. They will become more sustainable. But it's quite possible that will be a paradigm of long-term, sustainable Cold War. That may be the paradigm in 15 years. Thank you very much, Alexander Vladimirovich. And I think that in this follow-up discussion, so we have about 25 minutes for our discussion, minus the presentation of Tom Graham. So because when he connects, so the topic of technological competition, technological race, and like a re-ideologization of domestic policy. And I would add international policy as well. So it deserves discussion and deserves sleeping upon. And because we'll have to deal with it sooner or later in a very pragmatic way. I suggest we move over to discussion. And I see many of those who would like just to speak up, ask questions. And I would like to ask all those present here, who are going to speak, introduce themselves, because sometimes you don't understand who you are talking to. Use the mic, please. Viktor Kharkov, member of the Council of the Economic Development of Russian Federation, president of the National Association Oil and Gas Service. Question to you. So we talked at length about competition. We can say it's a future competition and a future Cold War between the U.S. and China. So that's what are the risks and opportunities for Russia? So against the background of this competition between the U.S. and China, and what should be the strategy of Russia for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years to maximize for the opportunities to develop our own technological development, social and political development. What are the opportunities in this confrontation with the U.S. and China, between the U.S. and China? I'll try to answer. But I'm a moderator, and I'm not supposed to participate in this discussion. But I think it would be correct to say that this continuing this quick movement towards strengthening and deepening of the relations, comprehensive strategic partnership and interaction, cooperation in the new epoch with China, so meets the interests of Russia fully, because this is the main line, so that has been identified by our leaders. Diversification, deepening of our relations in all industries and all areas, that meets our interests. Definitely, it's in our interest, and definitely we'll be working even closer and on different multilateral sites and meetings and gatherings concerning the United States. As regards the U.S., in my view, there's prospects of improvement or just going up, improving relations. It's not there. It's not even in the cards between Russia and the U.S., irrespective of who will come out victor of the election campaign and who will be the next president of the United States, and how the forces in the chambers of Congress and Senate will be distributed, and because that's why this strengthening the partnership with China is the main trend, is the main avenue that we're going to follow.
In the orthodox approach towards the Cold War, we say that George Kennan started the first whispers against the Cold War, and the event that solidified it was the Korean War. We kind of have the same situation with Kennan in the US already, with discussions of the ideological threats of China to the United States. My question is somewhat straightforward. Could Taiwan become the Korean War of the Second Cold War? Thank you.
Я адресую этот вопрос уважаемым участникам дискуссии.
I will address this question to all those who are online as well. I have already said that the Taiwan Strait, so they want just to provoke the Ukrainian scenario. But Taiwan is not Ukraine. And it's the internal domestic problem of China. And it's the similarity ends there. And China has always been trying to address this issue by peaceful means, and does not. But at the same time, China does not forgo other ways of addressing this issue. Every day, by the way, that's an interesting fact. More than half of all the cargo, half of the cargo of the world goes through the Taiwan Strait. Half trade over. If there is a military conflict there, then how would it impact the global trade, the global economy? But the attempt to provoke the Ukrainian scenario applied to Taiwan is obvious. It's there. The writing is on the wall, and it's very dangerous. Thank you. Anyone wants to follow up, to comment So this wonderful and very concisely and accurately made comment. On my part, I wanted to said that the Crimea and the southwest of Ukraine and everything that's related to it, de facto for us was a domestic issue as well. Otherwise, we would never made this difficult decision to start the special military operation. So in other ways to protect the interests and the lives of the people who have become the residents of new territories of the Russian Federation, and to guarantee the lawful rights of the residents of the Crimea and Sebastopol in 2014 without bloodshed. So it was not possible.
Sayed Kazem Sajjadpur from Iran. Actually, I have two questions. First, I do agree that Chinese-American relationship is not an easy relationship, but it seems that they have mechanism of management to prevent it, from worsening, including this recent summit. Is it true or not? The second question is regional. We see Chinese-American competition in a way, or even confrontation, in the Middle East. Look at what happened between Iranian, Saudi rapprochement. China was the country which was trusted, and U.S. was not trusted by Saudi Arabia in whole this issue. We see also the connection on technology that U.S. pushed Israel to withdraw from some of the economic high-tech projects, in Haifa port. So, is it true that the area of Middle East is becoming one of the focal point of this type of competition or confrontation? Thank you.
Спасибо.
I suggest that who would like to speak first on this point? I think it's very vibrant, extremely interesting point that has been made, and who would like to comment on that?
Question. Okay.
Профессор Джан, прошу.
Professor Zhang, please.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to answer the first question raised by Iranian participants. Yes, there are many mechanisms, between China and the United States. We have already, set up a number of working groups discussing, the relations between the two countries at several levels, especially along with the two presidents met in San Francisco. There, I think it's a successful, meeting. Both sides elaborated their policies, policy stance, and the core interests, and also they came to consensus over many issues such as anti-drug and regular communications between militaries of both sides. And also we, have a common goal in addressing the climate change and so on and so forth. So we have a lot in common when we talk about the bilateral relations as well as the global issues. But it's by no means like everything have been already settled down or solved. For example, Taiwan Strait issue, Taiwan issue, is a core interest of China, and there are some risks. But I think we have already, established, mechanisms to manage the crisis, to prevent especially the military confrontation from taking place. So that's my response question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarifications. I don't know if they are, do they cover the subject or we need to belabor the point longer? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, go ahead.
You, Professor, whether you wish to respond to his second question. Thank you. Probably next time. Oh, you go ahead.
No, but probably Professor Li.
We move on. Прошу вас. Вот там.
Move on. Okay, then another question. So that's lady there. Yes, please go ahead. Thank you. Thank you for noticing me, so Russian Council for International Relations. My question is for everyone. Where is the place of Western Europe, Western Union in America, China confrontation? So the way. So where is where EU comes into it, and where there is room, there is place for it. So it's the question to all of you, So is there room as a place of the EU in this conflict? I have the impression, I have the feeling, for example, so if the United States wants to maintain its status of superpower, so the most important threat, it's not China. Yeah, so if the Chinese dream comes true, it's not the root threat for the United States. Even if the Soviet Union had been restored, this is not possible. So it's not the main threat either. But if Europe, especially Western Europe, if it carries out strategic independence and achieves its strategic independence, that's the end of hegemony of the United States. If Europe becomes independent, and this is the reason why the U.S. is trying to do everything to control Europe. How? They need to create for Europe an enemy. That's how to control Europe. Unfortunately, so Russia played the part, and China has nothing to do with it. Although so Russia views Russia, America views Russia as a systemic threat. So what kind of threat? Because we just live normal lives, so we're not anywhere, we're not touching it. So all of a sudden another guy comes in and says, "So I don't like the way you live." So if you live like that, if you continue to live like that, that's a systemic, clear and present danger to me. So change your ways. This is not possible. And so Zhang, Yuyan, please, on the same topic.
I like the question very much. Europe is very important. I think, when we talk about China-U.S. relations, we could not limit ourselves to the U.S. relations. We need to move beyond China-U.S. relations. That's why I don't like the bipolar. I don't like that term. Today's world is a multipolar world. And of course, Europe plays a vital role, not only in terms of economy, but also in terms of security. We talk about Europe, in today's China, some scholars from my institute are talking about the possibility for China to unilaterally implement the China-EU comprehensive agreement on investment. I think it's a policy showing that China is going to open ourselves wider to the outside world. It also shows China's willingness to, get not only with the United States, but also with the world, especially the European Union. The world and the United States. There are European Union, Russia, ASEAN countries, Latin American, African, and many players in this world. So that's why I strongly, think that we need to go beyond the China-U.S. relations when we talk about the world, talk about the interdependence. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Yes, please, Professor Legwold, please, Legwold, please go ahead.
On this question, it's quite clear that the Europeans, at least major European powers, the Germans, the French, are concerned about the direction of U.S.-China relations were they to move toward a Cold War. From the beginning of the Biden administration, they resisted this tendency, Manichaean tendency, to divide the world into authoritarian democratic societies in terms of the core threat. And it is then more broadly manifest in terms of their resistance to the growing strategic rivalry if it is done in a way that restricts the room for maneuver and independence of other countries, including the European states. So you've had very specific instances that manifest the European concern. If you look at Scholz's piece in Foreign Affairs that announced the Zeitenwende, he begins by saying the talk of a growing U.S.-China rivalry with the potential of Cold War, he didn't believe that was underway. He didn't think that was the case. But when you look at the end of that piece in Foreign Affairs, where he's announcing the new direction for German foreign policy, much of it is directed at the things that need to be done in order to prevent the United States and China from falling into a Cold War. It is a clear expression, and those of us who have the separate independent conversations with Germans and with Europeans know that it's real, that they would be very unhappy if this strategic rivalry deepens, grows more cruder, and in a way, as I say, that limits their flexibility of foreign policy and their own economic opportunities. Then take the second case of Macron in China a year ago, when he came back saying that he was dealing with the Chinese in order to establish the independent French and European stake in that economic relationship, particularly in the areas of technology, because I think the extent to which the United States and the Chinese are waging techno-nationalism and over very specific things is of concern to the Europeans. And I would argue that the European concern about a U.S.-China Cold War were to deepen in that way, because it would both do economic damage to the Europeans, it would limit their economic opportunities within a global economy, and it would limit the flexibility of their foreign policy more generally. I would argue that applies to Russia as well.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I believe that this point of view is very precious for all the participants of the discussion, though not necessarily shared by those who are here at this panel and in the audience. But we still thank you. Thank you so much, Bob. So please, question is yours. I thank you, Nikita Ryabchenko from Baranovice, Belarus. I would like to address my question to Professor Yuyan. So, the world today can be described with a Chinese proverb. Once we don't change the direction, we may turn in the point where they kind of force us to go. The world actually was described by totally different concepts of public development. On one hand, the American dream, on the other hand, the Soviet concept. So my question is about the world of tomorrow. As we know, China is one of the few countries of the world that has long-term strategic planning on both economy and public development on the whole. So what could China actually oppose to the concept of American dream? And is it possible that the second 100 years target by 2049 that is contained, that is to build harmonized and balanced society, will be applicable and attractive at the global level? Thank you. Thank you. It is a very extensive question. Some ideologists from China should reply to you, not me, but I will try to answer it partially. The most important, the Chinese mentality of good, friendly neighborship is becoming stronger. That's Confucius said, and 40 years of the policy of openness and reforms, and all the success is achieved just by peaceful situation in the world, neighborship and friendship. When we decided to pursue this policy, Deng Xiaoping made the conclusion that we most probably will have 20 years of peaceful development. That's why we started those reforms. China always needs peace in the world, across the whole world. Today, probably, I'm not sure that a Cold War will take place between China and the U.S. We are not competitors. China is a superpower, and not really. We consider ourselves an emerging country. We are still a backward country in some respects. In the U.S., in order to keep their status, they don't need peace. They need game and chaos. Their strategy is to create condition of control chaos, of chaos, and to promote their interest. And what will happen in 2049? I'm afraid not to live to see that. So we shall wish you a long longevity, happy life and longevity. So we still have time for one more question. Artem Fedorov, my question to Professor Liu Chuan. I'm interested about the position of China on biological program of the United States, building of labs in the post-Soviet space. Do you see a threat? Does China see a threat just like Russia, or China has a different position of those biomedical labs? I have no competence to answer, but as far as I know, China has the same position just like Russia. Probably Professor Zhang will has something to say about the topic.
This is the area with which I'm not familiar with. It's I am economist, so I prefer to answer questions related to investment or trade or even trade war between the two countries.
Thank you. I believe we shall be coming back at different forums to this question, and we shall have reasons to do so. And I myself would like to express my deepest gratitude to all the participants of the discussion that actually touched the nerve of international relations. And the feelings of the whole world will depend on the weather between China and the U.S. Many countries in distant corners of the world will depend on that weather, those relations. So we keep discussing, and we discuss opposite approaches and opinions. It is the most convoluted relations of the two important countries, two important economies, have no precedents in the past. And the politicians actually use the method of trial and error. We want to see as few errors as possible. We want to see less errors. Experts in economics, in technologies, and their influence of modern life should pay greater attention to Chinese and American, Russian state of affairs at each moment of time. And indeed, we are entering the terra incognita, the brainstorms and the ways to deliver messages and approaches to each other is something that is relevant like never before. Today we heard that misunderstanding of some starting points may become a source of serious problems and crises. How can we knock and pass the message and to prevail and prove to another party of your sometimes opposite point of view of perceptions, or at least very much different from the one that you are used to? This is a question of the questions. And I think that all of us have yet to think hard, to work a lot, and I wish you wonderful meetings, very good discussions, and I want to thank you again for the wonderful panel discussion. And good luck.